Hey TV fans, Bored now back with you. On this video I'm going to be talking about episode 1 of the new Apple TV series Lady in the Lake. The episode is called Do You Know Seahorses Are Fish? So full spoilers from the start of the review. Think about reviewing both of them in one video, but the reason I didn't in the end is just because each episode is about an hour long or just under an hour, and it is quite a meaty show, or it looks like it's going to be quite a meaty show from this opening episode with quite a lot going on. It's these two women in 1960s Baltimore, and they're played by, so you have Maddie played by Natalie Portman, and you have Cleo played by Moses Ingram, who is sort of quite a newcomer, been in one or two things, but virtually unknown in many ways. And they come from very different backgrounds. So you have Natalie Portman's character, Maddie. She comes from quite a well-off, middle-class, like Jewish type background. But one of the things that it shows you in this first episode with her character is that even though she's quite well off and comfortable in comparison with Cleo, then there are still restrictions, a lot demanded of her, and a lot of like drawbacks to someone in her position as a woman compared to someone who's a man, for example, maybe her husband. And I'll get into that stuff a bit later, but that's something which the episode shows, that even though she is like better off financially, more comfortable than Cleo, being a white woman, she doesn't have to deal with like the racism and the prejudice which Cleo does, but she does have to deal with certain other things. And that's something which this show is looking to do, is compare and contrast the two characters' lives and slowly build up both characters and the people around them in their lives as well. And then at some point there's going to be a dramatic incident which is going to make the two stories intersect. But that's what this episode is doing. So as I said, it shows Natalie Portman's life, Maddie's life as this quite well-off, middle-class woman, Jewish woman, because Jewish, again, is an important part of this. And then you have Cleo, who is from an African-American background, again, very modest sort of background, and with this being 1960s, in the same way as Natalie Portman's character has to deal with some sexism, Cleo not only has to deal with a little bit of sexism, but more so she has to deal with like racism and segregation. First episode is setting up the two characters and kind of showing how different their lives are, but how there probably are similarities as well. Jewish girl who is missing throughout the episode, and it's just happened they're feared that if she doesn't show back up in the next 24 hours she might be dead, or there's this outcry over this Jewish white girl. But it would be a very different story if it was an African American girl. I don't know much about this story because I didn't know much about the story going in. I know it's from a novel. Focus, as I said, is partly on this missing girl, and that's something which draws the Natalie Portman character in this first episode, and it leads to a really tense scene between her and her husband, by the way, played by Murray out of Stranger Things. He's really good in this opener as well. Be something in the future with Cleo, and that's something they're going to do, where it does appear from the way they set this opening episode up that in the future Cleo will be killed, but we're going to build up to that. And that's something which they're showing is kind of the hypocrisy. Then there wouldn't be this sort of outrage or this kind of like worry around the community if it was an African American woman. Because something they do at the start of the episode, which is a good way into the drama, is then you hear Cleo's voiceover, and she has this line about how before she died she was Cleo, and I forget what the surname is, but she says her name before she died. But once she died and was found dead, she was just known as the Lady in the Lake. And that's something which, again, is a very sharp sort of comment on like racism, because it's this idea of you're just reduced to like kind of a headline in a way, sort of like just a name. Whereas with the Jewish girl who's gone missing in this first episode, they're always referring to her as her name, by her name. And something which is made a point of at the very end of the episode, which I'm in full spoilers, so I can just say what happens, that basically Maddie and another character, Judith her name is, who friends Maddie at some point when she's looking for a new place to like live and stay. And she's played by Mickey Madison of Scream 5 fame, by the way, couple of other things. But she kind of gets attached to Maddie and they go for a walk because Maddie is going to this, like, to be part of the search party for this girl. And then they find this body down by the lake and it appears to be the girl. And that's like the end of the episode where Maddie insists and she stay with the body whilst Judith goes and get some help. Don't worry, I'll stay with the body until help arrives, but go and get help. Trust me, if you were a mother, you would understand. Because then what happens is we get another voiceover from Cleo where it says, in the moment of death, you stop becoming a mother almost. So again, that's a little bit of a commentary. Then you are suddenly, sometimes, especially maybe during this era, you are stripped of who you were, your identity a bit, just because you are dead. It opens things up, like the setup in the past where you have this, it's like 1966, Baltimore, and it's like a Thanksgiving Day parade, and you've got all these glitz and glamour in a way, like everyone seems to be happy, and you've got like funny little characters like Saint Nick, but you've also got, because there's a little bit of humour like at the start where the first shot of the actual episode, I think, is like someone dressed as like a dustbin or something, and it's this character who's going to be in the parade, but he's actually going toilet down the back of the alley before he goes on to be in the parade. And that's just like one of those little touches where I think it's sort of saying that, hey, it's this big glamorous day and it's this fancy little parade and you've got crowds out, but there's still murky everyday shit going on behind it. Facade that's put on sometimes with certain characters. It also does a good job of setting up the Jewish side of things in this, because in the opening scene we have both Maddie and Cleo as young girls, and we see Maddie at the parade. Mother is like all poo-pooing Christmas because they're Jewish, so they don't believe it. And she's just saying, yeah, it's all made up. And she's almost like, even though they're enjoying the parade, she's doing her best to just drill into Maddie. Jewish way is the way to go. Christmas is phony and all that stuff. This is the proper religion. And it's just a good way to set things up, because I think one of the things with Maddie in this episode is then by the time you get to her as a grown-up and stuff, she has grown up with all this. And it's a little bit like if you grew up in like a super like Christian household where you've constantly had this drilled into you, like this is the way, there's no other way, and it's just so rigid. Then for Maddie, I think that's what it is with like the Jewish stuff. And even though she's now an adult and in theory should be free to like escape this stuff if she wanted to, or at least go into other areas, and not everything about her life is about being Jewish, then she still feels trapped. A parallel between the two women, because they both feel trapped, but for very different reasons. Best scene in the episode is the scene with Natalie Portman, Maddie, and her husband, played by Murray, as I always call it, and she has forgotten the food for the day. And it's that sort of thing. It's the 1960s, so the woman of the house is expected to cook the meals every day. And her big thing is that they've been hearing the news about the girl going missing, and she wants to rally around and get involved in the search party, and that's what's on her mind. And all he can think about is, and it's partly a Jewish thing once again, that he expects a certain Jewish meal to be prepared. Almost tries to accuse her of like letting the family down and things like that. And as she puts it to him at one point, like, one day I forget, or I don't have something to serve you, and it's a whole big thing. It's a little bit of an imbalance in the relationship, and that he fancies himself a bit, and is quite sort of self-obsessed. He's giving a speech at this like Jewish convention. It's almost like he's enjoying the fact that he's got a wife who is front and center, and he's shouting out things from the audience. So it's almost this idea that he can't let her have a few minutes to give this speech. He's got to like show off and shout from the crowd. Spirals into this kitchen scene. He suddenly becomes very aggressive and violent towards her, and it's a great scene. It's so intense and on the edge of your seat. And Natalie Portman, who is a great choice for this role, is like brilliant in the scene. So it builds to like them basically having a tug of war with like a frying pan, and in the end it sort of whips back at her and she ends up wounding herself a little bit. And it takes that for him to like back off a little bit, because I guess he doesn't want to look like too much of a monster in front of the son. Portman's acting in that scene is just so good. Like, first of all, her rage and how it comes out of her, like, it's really explosive. It's almost like this woman has been built these years, and suddenly she's not going to take it anymore. But also, you know, how vulnerable and fragile she is, and how she trembles after things get out of hand and she goes off into the bathroom. But it's really good, and she doesn't back down even then. Like, she still calls him out on his bullshit, and she ends up like leaving. Kitchen scene is like the scene of the episode. But yeah, she makes this choice to leave him, and I really like the scene in the car as well, like where she's made this choice. She's gone out on her own for probably the first time in her life, and then you see the visual of like two Maddies in the car, so another one in the passenger's seat, and it's like, yeah, there's two halves of her, and she's kind of fighting between the two of them. Actresses are really good. I really like Moses Ingram as well. I don't think I've seen anything else with her in, but I thought she was really excellent as well. And it does a good job of setting up the two characters and their contrasting worlds, and like some of the theme. Period stuff is also good. I do have like a couple of complaints. I don't really like the opening titles. I think they're like a bit lame, and they just feel like typical of opening titles than you get in like modern day kind of prestigious streaming type shows and HBO style shows. It just feels like they're going for this moody sort of, but also a little bit quirky collage type feel. And yeah, I didn't really care for the opening titles. That's a small complaint, but just something that stood out. Clunky use of music in the episode, and that is they do a version of a really famous song, and it's sort of when the two characters, I think, are first travelling back home 60s, so Cleo has to sit like on her half of the bus and doesn't have the same sort of rights, and then you have Maddie just driving home freely, of like a really famous song, and it's just a little bit too cheesy, a bit too on the nose. Limited series, I think, fall into the trap a bit of so engrossed in the characters and the drama and these like meaty sort of themes, then I think there could be an issue where they forget to put that much thought into making it gripping or stylish, then maybe the style of it or the direction of it or suffer a little bit. Not really a problem in this first episode. I think it's not amazing, but as I said, the period detail is quite well done. Solid. There's one like really good transition sort of scene, which is at the very start of the episode, where we get a young Maddie in like a pet store, an African American boy in the same pet store who's off in the background, and that turns out to be he's the brother of Theo, and we get a little bit more on him later on. Nice little smooth cut to her in the present, where she's like in a food market, and I think she might be buying fish or something, but it's a nice little contrast. 7 episodes is enough to develop all these characters. I know the main focus are the 2 women. So far I'm into the drama with them 2, like their lives. Again, I think both actresses are very strong, and I think there's a lot to play with, and as long as each episode is about an hour or just short of an hour each, then I do think that's 7 hours. So I think that is plenty of time to tell a good story with these 2 women. I'm just worried a little bit because I mentioned Slappy there, and we do get a bit more of him in the present. I'm just wondering a bit if maybe there might be a little too much going on for like a 7 episode limited series. Maddie has to go and get like a dress for herself or an outfit for like this speech she's given later on. Goes to this store to get it, and Cleo happens to be working in the store. As Maddie is out in the front, Cleo is in the back, and like her boss or supervisor is just being like a right bitch to her, because Cleo brings up then the boss of the store, the manager, told her she could go home early today. The woman doesn't take this on faith, like she's questioning it. And even when she like begrudgingly agrees to let her go early, she says, I'll have to dock some of your pay because you're going early. And yeah, that's just a great like small example of the racism in this era. Cleo is treated as like a second-class citizen in this scene. The reason Cleo wanted to leave early is because she's actually going to be a part of like an African American conference, like a Black Lives Rights conference. So this is another bit where they're contrasting the 2. So you have Natalie Portman as Maddie speaking at like this Jewish conference, African American style protest conference, which Cleo goes to. Her best friend is the one actually talking. Someone like stands up and starts giving like abuse to Cleo's friend who's on stage speaking, and like he's actually criticizing her for pushing for like equal rights, basically, like sort of saying that it's actually caused more, this idea of equality has actually caused more problems than it's solved. And Cleo, it's a good moment for her because like she speaks up for her and says that, hey, we just want it to be, even if it's only a little bit, we just want it to be a little bit more equal. Really making you care about Cleo and really showing not just that she has like a tough life in general because of all the stuff that's happening, and it really gets inside her head, and the situation in the neighbourhood where, because of the way things are, crime is quite sort of rife, very poor sort of background. But a bit like Maddie, but in a different sort of way. Her like sort of strict background and the kind of restrictions and segregation has led to her being quite a sort of a bitter sort of tough character. But in some ways she does have her eyes more open than the Maddie character. Like the Maddie character in some ways, and it's not really her fault, but she is kind of living this facade, I think, in many ways, and it's a different kind of problem that Cleo has. But I think there is like an honesty and a cynicism about Cleo, but also a passion to try and make things better. She goes home after a day at work and she's been to this conference, and we see that she's got a kid, husband or partner, whichever, doing like these kind of like comedy type things where they're just like play acting. And I think we see that he has an interest in becoming like a stand-up comedian, so him and the dad are doing like these routines, and it's quite a cute scene the way it starts, because what he's saying and trying to perfect the gags is pretty funny and cute, and the dad's playing along. So the way the scene is set up is that you think it's going to be just this innocent sort of playful scene, but what's really clever about it is Theo turns it around on the father, because she says, okay, that's good, but let me show you how it's done. And for a minute you think she's just going to play along with like the stand-up stuff, but she actually does this routine where she turns it around on the father and basically shames him for the fact that she's gone out, she's worked a job, she's gone to this other event and has had a really busy day, and that he hasn't even prepared like Thanksgiving dinner. Another little clever contrast with the Maddie stuff, because Maddie and her son, who's, I've got to say, a little shit, he really annoyed me a bit in this episode. Him being driven home by Maddie, and he's being a bit like sarcastic and like sarky with her in the car to start off with. But when they come home and Murray from Stranger Things is waiting. Son also, I forget his name, but he starts doing like this stand-up routine which mocks the mother, mocks Maddie. Murray from Stranger Things doesn't do anything about it. He doesn't like tell the son off, say no, that's not on, show her a bit of respect. he just, I don't know if he laughs or he's just a bit awkward, but he doesn't do anything. In his mind, it's kind of like, yeah, the son's on my side, so that's good. Cleo has a little bit more power in those scenes because she's using the stand-up routine as something to turn it around on the dad and like shame him into not doing enough. Whereas Maddie, who doesn't really deserve to be mocked in that scene, is being mocked by her family. Cleo in the episode is that we find out that she works another job, which is working at this club, this like big jazz type club with lots of up and coming performers. Slappy's at the door trying to get in because he wants to perform, and we find out later on that Cleo, for whatever reason, didn't want him in the club. Like maybe she just thinks he's not cut out for this, or maybe she just doesn't want him getting hurt if it doesn't work out, that kind of thing. Or there could be a different reason. Tries to sneak in through the basement, and then he comes across something which appears to be, it's either someone who's drunk and passed out, or it does seem to be like a body, and it's in the basement of this club. So it maybe shows that there's going to be some shady stuff that's linked to this club. Cleo at one point is called over by the guy who runs the club. Shames her for a couple of different things. He shames her for not letting Slappy to the club because he says you're putting him in danger in a way, because there's been a lot of African American people being killed, and that's the way he puts it anyway. Then he doesn't want another African American person dropping dead. If he's in the club, he's safe. Blames her for like giving that speech and volunteering her time, because he wants her to get up on stage and like perform or introduce the next act or whatever. And he shames her into doing it because he says, well, the difference is you volunteered to speak at that thing, so you'll do that, but you won't do this even though I'm paying you to do it. So once again we see a little bit of the manipulation fantasy scene, because you like see Cleo singing this like really perfect sort of song, and I was a bit confused of if it was meant to be the singer she introduced who's singing the song, but I get the impression it was her, but maybe it was her in her head. It's really stylized, beautiful song. Some good stuff set up with Cleo in the club, and some intriguing things with Slappy maybe, and with Maddie, and with Judith finding the body. And again, I do quite like that actress, the actress playing, I think Mickey Madison her name is, playing Judith, so I hope she's got quite a big part in it as well. So you've got a pretty solid like supporting cast, as well as also having these two really good leads. A promising first episode anyway. It's very solid, and hopefully it just builds on it from now on. One episode at a time could be a good way to watch it, because there is quite a lot going on. They're quite meaty, and they are, close to an hour, or at least the first two episodes are. Let me know what you think if you've seen this first episode. If you've seen the first two, don't give any spoilers for episode 2 in the comments, but just comment on this episode. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe as always. And you can support me at patreon.com/borednow for just $1 a month. But I will be back soon with my thoughts on episode 2. But thanks for listening and goodbye.